The opening meeting of a social audit is of particularly high importance. I will help you understand what the overarching purpose of an opening meeting of a social audit is, what topics will be covered, and what actions need to be completed, what needs to be prepared by the auditee for the opening meeting, and finally, who needs to participate in the opening meeting. The overarching purpose of the opening meeting of a social audit. While the purpose of the opening meeting could be described as just covering a variety of specific topics, which we will talk about in detail in a minute, this would not do the meeting justice, as it sets the tone for the whole audit. The opening meeting is in many cases the first time the auditor or auditors meet the relevant facility management. If the opening meeting turns out to be a catastrophic event, the whole audit might follow the same catastrophic lane. Maybe the chemistry between the auditors and management is just off. Maybe the facility management does not agree with the audit or has different expectations on what is expected from them and what would be covered during the audit. The way the experienced assessors are able to navigate these turbulences and the possibly present dissatisfaction with the audit itself makes a big difference for the rest of the audit. The purpose of an opening meeting really is to set the stage for what is to come and to kick off the audit in the most productive and effective way. For that, ideally a variety of different topics should be discussed and certain actions should be completed. This leads us to the second part. What topics will be covered? What actions will be completed? What needs to be prepared by the auditee for the opening meeting? The first element of the opening meeting of a social audit is an introduction of the assessors, maybe the client if present, and all other participants, for instance the facility management. It is important to transparently disclose and understand the roles and responsibilities of everyone involved at the very beginning. If it is communicated during an audit in Sweden, let's say, that Håkan is responsible for health and safety, but once you start interviewing him and reviewing health and safety documents, you realize as the auditor he's only responsible for a certain part, but not, for instance, for fire safety or fire drills, this might be a problem. A new meeting for the topic has to be arranged, and this could lead to time issues. The auditors will further explain the objectives of the assessment. Social auditors are in the position of independent fact finders. Assessors do not evaluate and do not point out any mistakes or scold the management. We generally do not have a pass or fail approach. Social auditors just understand the situation at the auditee, what systems are in place, how they are documented, how they are implemented, and if the systems are effective. The social assessors then compare the gathered understanding with applicable legal requirements of that country and the requirements of the social audit program that is being used. For example, it may be audited against the RBA VAP program or the IKEA iWay program, and so on. During the opening meeting, the social auditors clarify expectations set by the client or the audit program, the general audit approach, and the scope of the assessment. Our clients and the over 100 social audit programs we use expect full transparency and full cooperation from the auditee during a social audit. This means full access to all in-scope elements is requested, like access to site premises, all site premises under the same business license, access to workers for the interviews, and access to relevant documents like personal files for workers. Which employees are in scope of a social audit? In scope of a social audit are usually at least all blue-collar workers, both direct and indirect, but not always. It depends on the social audit program, the auditee, and the definition of blue-collar and white-collar staff. Some clients define that only staff relevant to their products shall be included. Who exactly is in scope of a social audit and what differences there are from program to program is a topic for another video. During the opening meeting of a social audit, the assessors will explain that social audits are sample-based assessments, which means that, in general, not all areas of a facility can be reviewed in detail. Not all workers can be interviewed, not all documents of a company can be checked. A CSR audit is never a 100% verification. The audit conclusions will be based on the drawn sample using a method called triangulation. The fact that social audits are sample-based assessments also reveals that even if there are no non-conformances found, for instance, with regards to working hours or excessive working hours, that doesn't necessarily mean that there are no issues. It only means that based on the drawn sample, no issues were detected. It's very important to understand. All participants of a social audit are asked to oblige to certain ethical standards. These include, for example, to not offer or accept any kind of bribes. For example, my last name is Mosel, like the river Mosel or the Mosel wine. And this might be reason enough to hand out some delicious Mosel wine. But due to the ethical standards, no Mosel wine may be handed out to the management during the opening meeting or any other given time for that matter. Social audits are in general voluntary. We as auditors are not part of any police or any state authorities. We perform the audit due to the business relationship between the client and the auditee, the company being audited. However, it is true that the auditee might not always feel that it's voluntary. Two common scenarios to why that is. First, if the mother company A asks their subsidiary B to do a social audit, the subsidiary B may have to comply with the request. Second, if a major client requires a social audit, declining the social audit might affect the business dramatically. The supplier refusing the audit could be blacklisted and lose the major client. So there might be some pressure to do the social audit after all. For us as the social auditors, however, the audit is voluntary. If a company denies access, we will not apply any force. Social assessments are strictly confidential. The auditors confirm the confidentiality of the assessment during the opening meeting. The audit report will not be released to the public, and in general, the payer of the audit is the owner of the report. Depending on the country where the social audit is being performed in, applicable GDPR requirements need to be followed. These GDPR requirements will be discussed during the opening meeting. GDPR means General Data Protection Regulations. This is mostly relevant for the HR department, as during the document review, personal files of workers like the payslips, for instance, shall be reviewed. So we need to make sure applicable regulations, GDPR regulations, are being followed during the social assessment. Let's talk about pictures for a second. Even though in many companies dozens of pictograms point to the fact that it is strictly forbidden to take any pictures, we as social auditors would like to take some pictures. Not because we want to, but because most, although not all, social audit programs require some form of picture documentation. Assessors are asked to document any non-conformities or non-compliances, and depending on the program, a variety of further pictures need to be taken for the report. For instance, these may be pictures showing fire safety measures like smoke detectors or visual alarms. As a general rule, however, at least here in Europe, pictures are never taken from any people, machinery and confidential data. I am aware that in many non-European countries this is handled quite differently. All of the parts of the opening meeting we have discussed until this point are usually explained by the auditors. But now that the audit expectations and the general audit approach have been clarified, further information from the auditee is needed, so the company being audited. Ideally, this information has been prepared before the audit. What exactly are we talking about here? For starters, a company presentation might be very useful for the opening meeting of a social audit. This includes, for instance, an overview of the different departments, the working hours system, the layout of the facility, any social areas, break rooms, changing rooms, any chemical storage, wastewater treatment plant, further addresses of the same legal entity, any canteen or security companies present on site, and so on. But that is not all. This next point is a very important aspect as it gets often overlooked by companies having a social audit. It should be disclosed if there's any worker housing, sometimes referred to as worker accommodations or dormitories. We are talking about both on-site and off-site versions. And this applies to all in-scope workers. This is important. Not only the direct employees, but also any indirect workers like labor agency workers. If it is the case that workers do live in by the auditee or relevant service providers like labor agencies provided accommodations, these would be in scope and shall be visited during the assessment. During the company presentation of a social audit, it is a very good time to describe any available worker representation. Are there any works councils or similar representative bodies on site? Are there any union representatives there? Does the company have to follow a collective bargaining agreement? And so on. And then it is time to discuss the breakdown of the workforce. Ideally, the auditee has prepared two things here for the opening meeting. First, an overview showing the general workforce information. How many blue-collar workers? How many white-collar employees? How many direct? How many indirect employees? What nationalities are present? How many employees belong to which gender? And so on. So that is the first thing to prepare, the workforce breakdown, the general workforce information. And second, the site should have prepared a list depicting at least all in-scope employees with the relevant demographic information attached to each employee. What kind of information is needed exactly is a topic for another video. The agenda. After the auditors have a basic understanding of the company's setup, the facilities and the workforce, and the auditee has a good understanding of the social audit approach, the expectations and the scope, it is time to finalize the tentative agenda. The agenda of a social audit includes all of the relevant audit elements like worker interviews or health and safety document review. The agenda is always tentative, as changes might need to be made during the assessment. We always have to be quite flexible during the assessment due to unforeseeable events, but an agenda may give some general structure to plan the audit. Check out the related video if you want to know more about the typical structure of a social audit. After the opening meeting, in general, a facility tour follows, but before it goes to the facility tour of a social audit, it is imperative that any safety rules are discussed. This includes any PPE, meaning personal protective equipment, that is required. Applicable PPE may be safety shoes or safety glasses. Depending on the industry, for instance in the food industry, further applicable necessary measures for food safety should be revealed to the auditors. The auditors are supposed to follow applicable hygiene and safety rules of the auditee. Once that is clarified, the opening meeting may be over and the facility tour may start. But there's one more thing that is usually done before the facility tour, and it helps the auditee navigate the audit much better. And that is this: the selection of employees for the voluntary and confidential worker interviews and the related document review of a social audit. It works as follows. During the opening meeting, the social auditors select the by the social audit program defined sample size, for instance 20 people, choosing only in-scope workers. This means the selection is made of both direct and indirect workers. And this is very important. The auditors select during the opening meeting, not the facility management. The worker selection can in fact be done in different ways. It can be made based on an employee list or from a current shift plan or attendance list. Selecting from the shift plan or attendance list increases the probability that the selected workers are actually present and available for worker interviews during the social audit. Workers may also be selected during the facility tour, when the social auditors, together with the management, walk through the factory. It's quite logical why that is, isn't it? If there are, for instance, any undocumented migrant workers or children working at the site, they might not be on the employee list presented by the management. It goes without saying that any retaliation against workers for participating in the audit and the worker interviews is strictly forbidden and a big issue for at least our clients. During the opening meeting of a social audit, the assessors will select several months for which they would like to see payslips and attendance sheets. For some social audit programs, 6 months are selected, but for most of the over 100 programs that we work with, 3 months are selected. These are in most cases, although not all, the most recent months, one peak production month and one low production month. Some programs say just select 3 average months. If there are no peak and no low months, other average months will simply be chosen instead. HR can then gather the needed documents for the sampled employees to have them ready for the HR management interview and document checking section. If the personal documents cannot be shown in time, this would be a big issue. Not for the auditors, but for the company being audited. This would be called partial access denied, and it is quite often a zero-tolerance issue for many clients. We have reviewed together the overarching purpose of an opening meeting of a social audit, the expectations, the audit approach, topics discussed during the opening meeting, what needs to be prepared by the auditee for the opening meeting, but who shall participate in the opening meeting of a social audit. Aside from the social auditors, maybe the client if present during the assessment, the auditee key staff should ideally be present. What does this mean? Key staff refers to all individuals from usually the management team that will participate in the audit in one way or another. Key staff are the people who have the knowledge and access to the documents and information needed to complete the audit elements successfully. Key staff may therefore include representatives especially from HR, health and safety, environment, supplier management, procurement, business ethics, or management systems, for social compliance, not for quality. Depending on the size of the auditee, there may be several individuals involved in the same main topic. For instance, there may be different people covering some parts of the environment area. One person may be responsible for the greenhouse gas emissions and one is responsible for waste management. Then both would be asked to participate in the opening meeting, ideally. Last but not least, also the worker representation. For instance, representatives of the Works Council or unions are invited to participate in the opening meeting. The order in which all of the discussed elements of a typical social audit opening meeting have been laid out in this video may vary. Certain topics might need to be adjusted, added or scratched depending on the audit program in question. But I do hope that by now you have a better understanding of the purpose and the general contents of a typical social audit opening meeting. Depending on if you're part of the auditee side and you will have a social audit in the future, or you are in the client role and want to order social audits for your supply chain, you might still have a lot of questions. If you have any further questions, feel free to reach out to us. If you're looking for an experienced partner to perform social audits in your supply chain, feel free to reach out to us. If you would like us to train your own staff as either internal or external social auditors, well, you know what to do. My name is Hendrik, Mosel like the river or the wine. See you in the next one.